The next book is Get Honest or Die Lying by Charlamagne the God. This is Charlamagne's third book. For those who don't know who Charlamagne is, who may not be New Yorkers that listen to Power 105.1 or the dozens of, I think hundreds of cities that show is syndicated to. He's a radio personality, a podcaster, co-host with Andrew Schultz of the Brilliant Idiots, and he also does dope interviews, which I probably appreciate, not most, because I'm a big Brilliant Idiots fan, but very close second is his one-on-one interviews that he does. He's had one with Judy Blume. The most recent one, I think, was with Big Sean, which was really good. He did one with LL Cool J, and he has a bunch of them on his YouTube channel, See the God, which if I remember, I will link to in the episode notes. But he's written 3 books as well. The first 2 were Black Privilege and Shook One, both of which I've broken down in prior episodes, so you guys can go back and check that out. And this is the latest that I'm going to immediately dive into and share a few clips that resonated with me. The first one, and I'm paraphrasing, in chapter 5, which is titled Evolutionary Revolutionary, he says, let go of unnecessary judgment. Who you and others are at 20 usually isn't and shouldn't be who you are at 40. Evolve and work on becoming the best version of yourselves. And an example that he uses is T.I. and Jeezy, which were considered thugs in their 20s and are now pillars of their communities. In chapter 8, titled Self-Destruction, he quotes Ezra Minicum, who says, trauma in a person decontextualized over time looks like personality. Trauma in a family decontextualized over time looks like family traits. Trauma in a people decontextualized over time looks like culture. I thought that was an amazing perspective right there. In chapter 10, titled Astronaut Kids, he speaks a lot about the power of talking big to our kids and also not discouraging them. And if I remember correctly, he gives an example of, a child telling their parent that they want to be an astronaut, for example, and that some might discourage that type of thinking, like, oh, you're not smart enough, or you're too tall, or, Dominicans aren't astronauts, or, like some form of negativity towards them and turning down their idea, even if it's a grandiose, wild idea. And even thinking back on my own life, and I'm sure it's true for everyone, when you're young and impressionable, and if somebody, shits on something that you might be excited about, you're prone to going in that direction of thinking that maybe you're not worthy, or you're not good enough, or you shouldn't want, XYZ thing. And that type of thing definitely stays with a kid, and, you internalize that into adulthood. So he highlights the importance of talking big to your kids and saying, oh, really? Why? Wow. Why do you want to be an astronaut? And like nurturing those ideas. In chapter 14, titled Listen to the Elders, Bro, he says a story about people like Jay-Z and Tyler Perry and Steve Harvey, etc. And that people like that stay on top because at top of their respective careers, because they never stop learning. And he gives a personal anecdote of when Jay-Z started Tidal, that Charlamagne reached out to him and told him that he, has to add podcasts to the Tidal platform and not make it just about music. And he says that Jay-Z told him, cool, but first you need to school me on the podcast game. And he said that story to highlight how Jay-Z wasn't aware of the, podcast game, but he didn't play it off like, oh yeah, I got something in the works for that. He literally asked him, like, teach me, what's the whole podcasting about? Knowing that, Charlamagne's on Brilliant Idiots for more than a decade, a very popular, successful podcast. I don't know if by then, but does now have the Black Effect podcast network partnership with iHeart. And Jay wasn't afraid to ask for that level of insight, which I think is important. Our egos get in the way a lot. In chapter 14 as well, he mentions the importance of letting the kids stick around with the grown folks when they visit, instead of them, going back to their rooms or getting on their phones and tablets, and letting them engage in conversations. I guess that can go both ways, but definitely if it's like age appropriate stuff, it should help and enrich them, right? In chapter 21, titled The Point, he says, he speaks about having an idea that you're passionate about and not letting it go, not letting it slip. And he used like a like the wordplay of the song Lose Yourself, and I thought that was a nod to M. And as a huge M stan myself, I definitely appreciate that. This was a funny point, I thought. In chapter 24, The Gossip Files, he says, modern day celebrities, when I try to deduce what it is that they do, I realize that this is what they do. They post pictures to Instagram and do TikTok dances. That's what they're famous for. And they have like 6 million followers, which is more than the population of some US cities. I thought that was a salient point there, just funny. In chapter 26, Imposterism, he says that you need people that can see what you have and what you have to offer, but also know what you need to be successful. And that made me think of my high school freshman English teacher, Ms. Gitlitz, shout out to her, who I always acknowledge in my books and mentioned that she knew I should be a writer before I even had a thought of being one or wanting to be one. Like, she wanted me to write for the school newspaper. She always like praised my like essays and writing assignments and stuff in class. And the same with other, mentors that I've had throughout my life, which have fostered certain abilities of mine or have given me opportunities or put me on to things. Shout out to George Nobre or Naldo Coutinho, which I always acknowledge in my books as well. Also in chapter 26, titled Imposterism, he says that he shares something that his father always would tell him, which is that you're never as good as they say you are, and you're never as bad as they say you are. And he highlights that a pastor told him that anxiety and fear are closely related, almost like cousins. Fear is partially rooted in a lack of understanding, and anxiety is too. When you're in a new environment, around new people, having a new experience, there's going to be a certain level of anxiety just because it's new and you don't know the terrain. The opposite is true of your house. When you're walking around your house, you're comfortable. You know where everything is. You know everyone there. It's yours. And there's 2 more points to share. Also in Imposterism, I like that chapter. Chapter 26, related to imposter syndrome itself, he tells a story about Kevin Hart and how he had a sitcom canceled early on. But he says that he was just very early on in the process. You can sell yourself enough to get an opportunity, but that opportunity won't necessarily work out as expected. But that doesn't mean that you're an imposter. Maybe you needed to be in that room to learn, and a real imposter wouldn't have even gotten into that room in the first place. And lastly, also from chapter 26, Imposterism, shares something that Tyler Perry once said, which is that you have to aim for worthy. Anything you've done, anything that you're doing, or anything that you're going to do, you're worthy of it. Always aim for worthy. And those were the gems that I wanted to share with you, fine folks, from Get Honest or Die Lying: Why Small Talk Sucks by Charlamagne the God. I will link to it in the episode notes for you fine folks to check out.